Damon Wells was 38 years old when the ivory envelope arrived at his office on a Wednesday morning, addressed in Camille's handwriting. And he held it for a long moment before opening it, because he already understood, from the weight of it, that whatever was inside was meant to make him feel something specific. It was an engagement party invitation, her name and Preston Hale's, embossed in gold. Saturday at the Ballantine Hotel. Cocktail attire requested. He set it on his desk and looked at it the way he looked at everything that needed measuring. To Camille, and to the world she had carefully curated since the divorce, Damon Wells was the man she had outgrown. A logistics man. A warehouse operator, a guy who drove a sensible car and worked sensible hours and had, she told her friends, no real ambition. Preston Hale was what ambition looked like. 42. A real estate developer with a Porsche and a name people mentioned in rooms Damon had never bothered to enter. What Camille had never once thought to ask. In 7 years of marriage and 11 months of careful separation was why Damon's company had 3 different law firms on retainer, or whose name was on the $40 million distribution contract that had just closed with one of the largest retailers in the Southeast. What Preston Hale did not know, what he would not understand until he saw who walked through that ballroom door on Damon's arm Saturday evening, was that the woman he had been trying to get a meeting with for 6 months had already met Damon Wells. Twice, what happened at that party cost Preston Hale considerably more than the evening. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The invitation sat on the corner of his desk for 2 days before he moved it. He was not avoiding it. He was simply operating on his own schedule, the way he always had, the way that had driven Camille to the conclusion that he lacked drive. She had mistaken patience for inertia. That distinction had always been the heart of what she never understood about him. His office was in a building he owned outright on the edge of Steel Creek. A low, clean structure with a loading bay at the rear and a conference room at the front where he had closed every deal that mattered in the past 8 years. The company logo was painted on the wall in plain navy and white, Wells Freight Solutions. 4 words that told you nothing about the scale of what they described. He liked it that way. His mother had told him to. Ruth Wells had worked overnight dispatch at a trucking company in Spartanburg for 19 years and had understood the logistics industry at a molecular level, where the margins lived, what it cost to be late, what it earned to be reliable. She had told him once, sitting at the kitchen table with a road atlas open between them, Damon, the man who moves things quietly, is always the man with leverage. Don't announce yourself until you have to. She had been gone 4 years. He thought about her most on the mornings when her advice was most clearly right. He had met Camille at a graduate school mixer in Charlotte. She was finishing her MBA, and he had been invited by a classmate. She was sharp and social, and had a specific directed energy he found attractive, the ambition of someone who knew what she wanted and was moving toward it without apology. He had respected that about her. He had for years believed they were moving in the same direction. The trouble had started gradually, around year 3. It was not dramatic. It was the accumulation of a particular kind of communication. Her friends had money that showed. Her colleagues had titles that announced. And Damon was a logistics operator who drove a fleet of trucks and worked in a building without a lobby. She began to apologize for him at parties without using that word. He began to notice. He said nothing. Because he was patient, and because he was building something, and because he believed, this was the mistake, that what he was building would eventually speak for itself. His second phone, the one connected to the company operations network, the one that received contract notifications and due diligence reports from his legal team, lived in his inner jacket pocket and had never once rung in their house. She had assumed it was a work phone. It was. She had simply never understood the full scope of the work. The divorce had been finalized 11 months ago, clean and uncontested, because he had structured his assets the way his mother had structured his education, deliberately, quietly, in his name alone. Camille had received what was fair. She had moved on with visible enthusiasm. He had moved on with his usual absence of performance. He had heard Preston Hale's name through peripheral channels before the invitation arrived, a developer with a growing profile in the Charlotte market. The kind of man who wore his net worth in a way Doman found professionally interesting, in the way a structural anomaly is interesting, worth examining before it failed. He thought about sending his regrets for approximately 45 minutes on a Thursday evening. Then, because he was methodical, and because Preston Hale's name had crossed his desk that same week in a very different context, he opened his laptop and began to look. What he found changed the nature of Saturday entirely. He was not looking for anything in particular. He was simply a man who had spent 15 years in a business where due diligence was survival. And the habit of looking carefully at the people around him had become as reflexive as checking weather before a delivery run. He started with the public filings. Preston Hale had 3 active LLCs in Mecklenburg County, 2 in Cabarrus, and a development entity in Gaston County that had filed for a large commercial project 18 months ago, a mixed-use development that had drawn significant financing from a consortium of investors. The project had been appraised at $28 million. That was the public number. Damon had a contact at a commercial appraisal firm, a woman named Vera who had consulted on 2 of his warehouse acquisitions and had the particular quality of remembering every transaction she had ever touched. He called her Friday morning. "Preston Hale's Gaston County project," he said. "You did a second opinion on it." A pause. "How did you know that?" "I didn't. I'm asking." Another pause, longer. "I can't speak to it directly, but I'll say this. The original appraisal came in 40% above what my team estimated for comparable properties in that corridor. My report was filed, and then not referenced again." He thanked her and ended the call. His hands didn't shake. He called his attorney, Marcus Obi, and within 2 hours Marcus had pulled the financing documents from the public record. The $28 million appraisal had supported a $19 million construction loan from a private investment fund managed by a firm called Dawson Capital Group. He knew that name. He knew it well. Because Dawson Capital had been one of 3 firms that approached him the previous year about a strategic investment in Wells Freight. He had declined all 3, politely, and had noted which one sent the most capable representative. Her name was Celeste Dawson. 40 years old, founding partner, the kind of professional who asked exactly the right question and listened to the whole answer. They had spoken twice over 6 months, once in a formal meeting, once at an industry dinner, and he had found her company genuinely valuable in the way he found very few people's company valuable. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his actions. He pulled the full financing package. The $19 million loan had been issued against the inflated appraisal. Vera's competing report, estimating the property at closer to $17 million in realistic comps, had never been disclosed to the lender. That was not an oversight. That was a decision. He cross-referenced Preston's other projects over the past 4 years. 3 projects, 3 appraisals, all from the same firm, all significantly above market. 2 had already sold at values well below the original appraisals. The fund holding the notes on both had taken losses. In one case, absorbed quietly. In another, an internal review had been initiated but not yet concluded. Dawson Capital was the note holder on the Gaston County project. Celeste Dawson's firm was sitting on a loan secured by a fraudulently inflated appraisal, and based on the pattern, did not yet have the full picture. He organized everything: the appraisals, Vera's competing report, the financing documents, the prior project comps, into a clean summary. He forwarded it to Marcus for legal review. Then, he called Celeste Dawson. She answered on the second ring. He told her he had come across something involving a Gaston County project note held by her fund. He told her the summary was in her inbox. He said he thought she should see it before making any further decisions about the associated loan. A brief silence. "I've been looking at that project for 3 weeks," she said. "I couldn't get the appraisal to reconcile. I know someone who can explain why." Another silence. Shorter. "How did you come across this?" "The man who holds the original appraisal just got engaged to my ex-wife," he said. "She invited me to the party." The pause that followed had a particular quality to it. "Well," Celeste Dawson said, "I suppose I should go with you." His attorney Marcus Obi was 49, ran a boutique corporate law firm on South Tryon Street, and had a habit of reading documents twice before saying anything about them. He read Damon's summary once, set it down, and said, "This is fraud." That was my read, not alleged. Documented. He picked it up again. The appraisal discrepancy is clear. The pattern across 3 projects removes any argument of isolated error. The failure to disclose the competing appraisal to the lender is the piece that makes this serious. He set it down. Celeste Dawson's firm is the victim in the active transaction. "I know. You're not going to the party to cause a scene." "I'm going because I was invited," Damon said. "I'm bringing Celeste because she has every professional reason to be wherever Preston Hale is until this is resolved." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded in the slow way of a man who recognized a clean plan when he heard one. Real power. He had once told Damon during a difficult negotiation, operated in quiet rooms and produced its effects in loud ones. He had been right then. Damon drove out to Concord on Friday morning to sit with his Uncle Raymond, his mother's older brother. A retired postal supervisor who had watched Damon build the company from the beginning and who had the quality of cutting directly to what mattered without ceremony. They sat on Raymond's back porch with glasses of sweet tea, and Raymond listened to the whole story without interrupting once. When Damon finished, Raymond looked at him. "She invited you to make you feel small. That was the intent. And instead you found out her fiancé is a criminal. I found out he has a pattern of fraudulent appraisals." Raymond was quiet a moment. "Then, your mother used to say the man who moves things quietly has leverage. You've been moving quietly for 15 years. He looked at Damon steadily. "Time to let the freight arrive." Back in Charlotte, Celeste's team at Dawson Capital spent 2 days conducting their own internal review of the Gaston County file. What they produced confirmed and expanded Damon's summary. The original appraisal firm had a prior relationship with one of Preston's LLCs, a connection not disclosed in the standard conflict of interest certification required by the fund. The $19 million loan was now, in Celeste's assessment, significantly undercollateralized. The fund had a fiduciary obligation to its investors that could not be deferred. She called Damon Friday afternoon. "We've notified our legal team. The State Banking Commission contact has been made. There will be a formal process." A pause. "It will be unpleasant for him." "I expect so. I'll still come Saturday," she said. I think it's important that he understand, before Monday morning, that the people who know what he's done are already in the room." She said it without drama. He found that quality in her extraordinary. The company continued its own business without interruption. Wells Freight had expanded its Charlotte hub by 40% over the past year, absorbed a regional competitor in the Triad, and was in final negotiations on a secondary $12 million contract with a distribution partner in the Mid-Atlantic. None of that had been announced. None of it needed to be. That Friday evening, Damon laid his good suit out on the chair in his bedroom. Charcoal, white shirt, a tie he owned for 6 years and wore twice a year and always felt right. He polished his shoes himself, a habit inherited from his grandfather and never abandoned. He was not nervous. He was not excited. He was simply a man preparing to attend an event with the same precision he brought to every professional obligation. Complete, unhurried, correct. Saturday morning he made his coffee, checked his freight manifests, reviewed his legal team's weekend updates, and waited. The Ballantine Hotel ballroom was well dressed. He would give Camille that. She had an eye for occasion, and she had applied it. The gold and white palette, the flowers, the lighting. 200 guests, the kind of room where everyone was performing for everyone else and calling it celebration. Damon walked in at 7:45, 20 minutes after the cocktail hour began, and 30 seconds after Celeste Dawson stepped through the entrance beside him. Celeste wore deep burgundy, structured and precise, the kind of clothing that announced professional authority without trying. She was 6 feet in heels, completely unhurried, and she held Damon's arm the way someone holds the arm of a person they are genuinely glad to be beside. She looked around the room with the clear, unbothered gaze of a woman who had walked into many rooms and found them smaller than expected. They made an entrance not because they intended to, but because they simply arrived, and the room noticed. Damon found Preston Hale before Preston found him. Across the ballroom, in conversation with 2 men in suits, champagne flute in hand, wearing the easy confidence of a man who believes the evening is already won. Telling a story. Hands animated, the men laughing. Then, Preston's eyes moved to the doorway the way eyes move in a social room, reflexively, tracking new arrivals, and they found Celeste Dawson. The story stopped mid-sentence. One of the men said something. Preston didn't respond. He was looking at Celeste with the specific expression of a man whose internal architecture has just shifted beneath him. He had been trying to get a meeting with Dawson Capital for 6 months. He had been declined twice. She was standing 20 feet away on the arm of his fiancée's ex-husband. Damon watched Preston process this in real time, the champagne flute lowering, the color in his face changing from the flush of performance to something considerably quieter. Camille found them first. She moved through the room with the composed confidence of a woman executing the power move she had planned. The gracious invitation, the public display of her new life, the implicit communication that she had done better. She was smiling. She looked beautiful. She had worked for this moment. She stopped when she registered Celeste. Not dramatically. The kind of stop that happens when the brain receives information that doesn't align with the plan. A half step. A recalibration. A smile that continued on momentum while the eyes asked questions the mouth wasn't ready to voice. "Damon," she said, "I'm glad you came." "Congratulations," he said. "Camille, this is Celeste Dawson." Camille extended her hand. Celeste shook it with the precise warmth of a professional who shook 50 hands a week. "Lovely party," Celeste said. "Where is your fiancé?" "I'd like to say hello." There was something in the way she said it. Measured, professional. No warmth and no threat. Just the clear intention of a woman who had a specific reason for wanting to find a specific person. that Camille heard without being able to name. Preston arrived at Camille's side a moment later. He had composed himself. He remained composed when he extended his hand to Damon. He was less composed when Celeste turned to him. "Mr. Hale," she said. "Celeste Dawson. Dawson Capital." She held his hand a beat longer than social convention required. "I believe your counsel has been trying to reach our office since Thursday." Preston's hand dropped. "We should speak Monday," Celeste said simply. "I think you already know why." She turned back to Damon with the unhurried ease of someone who had delivered the sentence she came to deliver and was now finished with that portion of the evening. Camille was looking at Preston. Preston was looking at the middle distance, with the expression of a man calculating the distance between where he was standing and every exit in the building. Damon looked at Camille, not with satisfaction, not with anger. He looked at her the way he looked at a route that no longer made operational sense, clearly, without resentment, with the understanding that the freight always found a better road eventually. "You have a good eye for an event," he said. "You always did." He touched Celeste's hand lightly. They moved toward the bar. They did not look back. The room had shifted. It would keep shifting for days, through Sunday conversations and Monday legal calls, and the announcements that would come before the month was finished. Preston Hale's Gaston County project was referred to the State Banking Commission the following Wednesday. The engagement was called off in 3 weeks, quietly, announced on social media as a mutual decision, which was the kind of language people used when the truth was too specific to publish. Damon heard all of this later. He was already gone by 9:15. He and Celeste had a reservation at a restaurant he had been wanting to try, and the evening was clear, and there was nothing left in that ballroom that required his presence. 10 months later, Damon sat on the back porch of a house he had purchased and renovated in Dilworth, a craftsman bungalow 2 blocks from the park, with a kitchen garden he had planted in April, and a back porch he had rebuilt, board by board, on a long weekend in March. Summer had come in heavy and green, and the tomatoes along the fence had gone past their peak and needed cutting back, which he would do on Saturday. Wells Freight Solutions had closed the Mid-Atlantic contract in February and expanded its regional footprint to a 3rd hub in Raleigh-Durham. The company now employed 212 people, contracted with 11 national retail clients, and was in early conversations with a private equity group about a strategic partnership he was considering carefully and without urgency. His mother had told him not to announce himself until he had to. He was still in no hurry. Celeste had offices in Charlotte and New York, which meant she was in Charlotte 3 weeks out of 4. Which meant she was on this back porch most Sunday mornings, with her own coffee and her own work and the particular quality of presence that he had found, from the first time they met, to be genuinely sustaining. She did not perform for him. She asked good questions. She listened to the whole answer. These were not small things. They were. He had come to understand everything. Preston Hale had surrendered his real estate licenses in North Carolina during the State Banking Commission investigation, which concluded in the spring with findings of fraudulent misrepresentation on 3 separate loan applications. His LLCs had been dissolved. 2 civil suits were pending. He had relocated to Columbia, South Carolina, which was far enough to be invisible and close enough for the people who needed to find him. Camille was in Atlanta now, senior marketing director at a firm there, which was, by all available accounts, a good outcome for someone with her ability. Damon thought about this without bitterness, because bitterness required ongoing attention to people who had moved on. She had moved on. So had he. The directions were simply different. He pressed his coffee mug between both palms now and watched the Saturday morning come in over the garden. It was overrun and honest and entirely itself. The way a garden went when you planted it right, and then had the sense to let it grow without interference. He was solvent. He was expanding. He was at peace in the specific way of a man who had never needed the world's acknowledgement to understand the value of what he had built. His mother had told him, the man who moved things quietly was the man with leverage. He had been moving things quietly for 15 years. The freight, at last, had arrived. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.